This Friday, Jamie Lee Curtis and Lindsay Lohan are back to switch things up in Disney's Freakier Friday.
Totally. Yes.
It's an absolute riot.
Woo!
And the only movie that can be described as
So much weirder than the last time.
What last time?
it's the frequel
You ready?
we've been waiting for.
That absolutely slays.
What deeply out-of-touch old person came up with that?
You did.
Wow.
Don't miss the comedy event of the summer for all ages. Disney's Freakier Friday in theaters this Friday. Get tickets now. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested.
Pie in the Sky Media. This series contains adult language and descriptions of graphic violence throughout. Listener discretion is advised. Pristine wilderness, glorious Montana, those woods imbued with springtime melodies, chirping birds, playful chittering squirrels. These sounds floated on a light breeze as sunshine poked through the forest canopy early that April morning in 1996. But there was a dark spot in those woods, a nondescript cabin that never fit into that landscape. Even though it had been there since the early 1970s, it had never become a part of nature, but always separate from it. Unlike in Hansel and Gretel's and the Brothers Grimm, this cabin was not built of bread and roofed with cakes. It was a cheerless 10 by 14 utilitarian structure. Made from wood, it had weathered into a dingy brown. The entrance to the cabin was less a door and more like a rectangle into a gloomy and oppressive space. And the tiny windows, they weren't handcrafted with blown transparent sugar. There was no witch inside, waiting for Hansel and Gretel to be enticed to her gingerbread home for treats. This backwoods cabin was the last place anyone would ever think of having their cake and eating it too.
I was also the one that found you can't eat your cake and have it too, as opposed to how most people say you can't have your cake and eat it too. And that really was kind of the silver bullet.
But it's these words of an angry, embittered madman that will lead a newly minted FBI profiler to this place on the thinnest of breadcrumbs.
That 30 days turned into a year and a half. And after a 17-year investigation, I was part of the team that helped finally identify Ted Kaczynski and take him down.
Welcome back to Criminal Mischief with Carolyn and Brandon. You're listening to episode 132, The Cabin in the Woods. The nightmare began in May of 1978 at Northwestern University in Chicago. A passerby found a package, addressed and stamped, sitting in a parking lot at the University of Illinois. This Good Samaritan returned the package to the person listed on the return address, a Northwestern University professor who spied the package and thought it was suspicious and called campus security. That package exploded upon opening and injured the security officer. The bomb was shocking, but how could anyone have known at the time that this was not just a one-off, but the beginning of a serial bomber's reign of terror? A year later, at the same university, a package had been dressed as a present. It was another bomb, and it was opened by a graduate student who would also survive the blast. 6 months later, another bomb sent through the airmail, and it nearly takes down an American Airlines flight. This bomb detonated in the luggage compartment, but it didn't explode as it was intended, and so the pilots were able to land the plane safely. In June of 1980, the president of United Airlines is sent a package. Inside there's a book, and when he opens it, it explodes in his hands. He too would survive his injuries. These were the first 4 of 16 bombs that would be made by an unknown serial killer the FBI would later describe as a twisted genius who aspires to be the perfect anonymous killer who builds untraceable bombs and delivers them to random targets, who leaves false clues to throw off authorities. A seemingly invisible suspect who taunted investigators with his signature initials FC, which he engraved in all of his bombs, but he would eventually become known as the Unabomber.
First of all, Unabomber is an acronym which stands for University Airline Bombings.
That's Fitz.
Hi, James R. Fitzgerald, Fitz for short, is my name and nickname. I'm an associate professor at Pennsylvania Western University, along with Ray, co-host of the Cold Red podcast, author of soon-to-be 4 books, 3 out now, 1 coming up, A Journey to the Center of the Mind, same title for all 4 books. FBI for 20 years, police officer in suburban Philadelphia, 11 years before that. I'm a forensic linguist and a criminal profiler.
Fitz would go on to play a huge role in this investigation, which we'll get to. But back in the late 1970s, with the explosion of the Unabomber's first incendiary device, Fitz was at the beginning of his career as a beat cop at the Bensalem Police Department, a suburb north of Philly. And like most everyone else, his only involvement in the case at the time was reading the headlines. And there would be a lot of breaking news. In the years between 1981 and 1987, there would be 8 more bombs sent around the country to unsuspecting victims. But before the 12th bomb exploded in 1987, this was in the parking lot of a Salt Lake City computer store, and it blew up in the owner's hands. But before this, one of his employees saw a man putting an object on the ground. This would be the first eyewitness of the so-called Unabomber, and her eyewitness account helped a sketch artist create what would become an infamous composite sketch of the Unabomber. Now, I just listed the dates and locations of where these bombs detonated, but the carnage that befell these innocent victims who were either murdered or maimed because they just happened to be randomly selected. A family member would describe what their loved one went through, being blasted by hundreds of nails, cut up razor blades, and metal fragments that were packed together and then exploded, perforating the victim's heart, shearing off their fingers, burning their skin, fracturing their skull, and driving shrapnel into their brain. In fact, these homemade bombs would kill 3 people and injure 23. The Unabomber's deeds, for more than a decade, gripped the nation in fear. Fear of random packages found in places or delivered by the U.S. Postal Service. But after the eyewitness saw the Unabomber and that sketch was circulated, the bombs stopped. For 6 years, the FBI thought the Unabomber was either dead or in prison. But in 1993, his reign of terror began once again. In June of 1993, a bomb maimed a geneticist at the University of California. There was another bomb at Yale University. In December of 1994, a New Jersey advertising executive is killed by a package sent by the Unabomber. And in April 1995, a timber lobbyist is killed in California. Why these targets? Why the lapse in 6 years? There were no answers to these questions. With little to go on, the FBI-led task force is on its way to earning the dubious distinction of being the longest and most expensive manhunt in the nation's history. With more than 150 full-time investigators, the task force would get a break when they hired another analyst, James Fitzgerald, or Fitz.
This case started in 1978. I was still a rookie police officer then in Bensalem Township, Pennsylvania. And I remember reading some newspaper articles about it long before the internet and, 24-hour cable TV. And then, of course, it got a little more heated. He killed his first person in 1985. The infamous composite sketch of the guy with the hoodie with the sunglasses, that came out in 87. I remember reading the articles along the way. I was just getting into the FBI in 1987. And I remember it was brought up a little bit in our training, that case, but it was still unsolved.
By the early 1990s, Fitz, who was born in Philly and raised in a working-class neighborhood, was no longer a beat cop. He'd gone on to be a detective, then a sergeant at the Bensalem Police Department, and then on to the FBI as an agent in New York City. And by 1995, he became an official FBI profiler at the elite Behavioral Analysis Unit, or BAU.
But I get promoted in 95 to Quantico, the FBI Academy. That's where it's located. Do 12 weeks of training with the great John Douglas, kind of the grandfather of profiling in the U.S., and others, both in the unit and from outside. Take a week off, go to the beach, and I get a phone call. Jim, would you consider, I'm Jim, it also fits depending who's talking to me, but my boss always called me Jim. Would you consider going to San Francisco for 30 days? They want a profiler on the Unabomber case. I said, boss, I heard what John Douglas, he gave a 2-hour block on the case. I've certainly read the media accounts of it. I know some kind of manifesto is about to come out. So yeah, that's why they want a profiler. Oh, 30 days? Sure.
So Fitz, fresh out of a 12-week profiling course at Quantico, when he stepped on that airplane to fly to San Francisco, this is what he knew, that the Unabomber was the deadliest serial bomber in U.S. history. And by 1995, he had been bombing for 17 years. He'd either planted or mailed 16 bombs that had killed 3 people and injured nearly 24 others. And yet, investigators had no idea who he was or why he was doing it. On Fitz's way from New York to San Francisco, he's given a binder to catch up on the case.
I look at this letter 10 years later on my flight out to San Francisco. I had a big 3-ring binder, no, digital tablets back then, or even small laptops, at least not for me. But looking at this big 3-ring binder, Dad, it is I. That's weird.
Before Fitz steps off that plane, he's found something in a letter that the Unabomber had sent to a professor, which led to his assistant unwittingly opening up one of his packages.
Because on the flight out there, I found hidden in a letter that no one else saw, it's called an acrostic. It's a literary term. It's like a hidden message in the left-hand column looking straight down, or right hand. It could be done other ways too. And it said, Dad, it is I. And it was a letter to Dr. McConnell at University of Michigan, and it tricked him, actually one of his students, into opening up the package. And he opened it up, and it blew up. Luckily, it didn't kill him, but it severely injured him.
At this time, the thing about Fitz is that, yes, he's green when it comes to profiling. He's also coming in with fresh eyes.
Your Dad, it is I. That's weird. I tell the bosses out in San Francisco, we're all FBI, but we're a big agency, and I didn't know anyone out there. They didn't know me. They're feeling me out. I'm feeling them out. Do I fit into their teamwork approach, which I did? And I said, by the way, like the second day there, this Dad, it is I. What do you make of that? Fitz, what are you talking about? Yeah, look at this letter here to Dr. McConnell. And all of a sudden, they call up headquarters, they call the Attorney General's office, and this is like a big deal to them. This is a clue, and the boss was mad. No one else in San Francisco, where the task force was located, ever saw it.
So, the Dad, it is I, that Fitz saw in the Unabomber's letter is an acrostic. If you think of it, it's sort of like a game in which certain letters in each line form a word or words inside of a poem, a word puzzle, or other composition. It was also a linguistic breadcrumb. Insight into the Unabomber's mindset. Possibly that he enjoyed puzzles, loved the idea of pulling one over on the reader. It also could show that he thought he was smarter than everyone else. But on a deeper level, the Unabomber potentially had daddy issues. This was a huge get. Remember, Fitz had been assigned to the task force to help put together a profile of the Unabomber. At that time, the profile they had put together on the Unabomber before Fitz had gotten there was that he was a disgruntled airline mechanic with a low IQ who they believed had gotten laid off, which is why he targeted airlines, and that he also targeted people at universities because he was mad that they were smarter than he was. The Dad, it is I acrostic didn't match that outdated profile. And it also didn't match a lot of the suspect pool of the task force at that time.
And by the way, a lot of people don't realize, in the Unabomber case, when I got out there the summer of 95 to the task force, they had 2,500 suspects. Some were named, some were just people walking down the street. Someone called in, we had an 800 number set up. It was the first case with $1 million reward attached to it, which, certainly a healthy reward for back in the mid-90s. A lot of other writings were coming in of suspects and this, that, and the other. I would say no. And again, I'm not a linguist at this point, but I just was so focused on the writing style of this person.
Right away, Fitz was anointed by the special agent in charge as the word guy. which was no small thing, considering the Unabomber's letters, aside from the exploded bombs, were really the only evidence they had.
And I'm reading through all these old documents, and including the initial writings of the Unabomber. There were 13 earlier letters. The 14th document was the manifesto, which a lot of people don't know this, but the Unabomber never called it a manifesto. He referred to it as his article. The media gave it the name manifesto.
The summer that Fitz joined the task force, the Unabomber sent a manifesto to the FBI and media outlets. It was titled Industrial Society and Its Future. 56 pages where he details his motives and views of the ills of modern society.
In the summer of '95, we now have this manifesto. The Unabomber wants it published in the New York Times, Washington Post, or a few other entities to which he mailed his copies. And he didn't make Xerox copies of these things. He used carbon paper. And Carolyn, I don't think you're old enough to probably ever use carbon paper to type a paper or a document. I did way back in the day. So bottom line, he used it, and all these people got copies. So now the big debate was, and the New York Times was also releasing that they received this manifesto article with a letter attached to it from the Unabomber, again, still unknown, saying that if you publish this thing, we, I'll use the plural pronoun we, or plural pronouns, we will cease and desist from bombing for purposes of killing people from now on. We will reserve the right to bomb for sabotage purposes, but we won't kill anyone. So now the New York Times had a decision to make. They could not publish it, not accede to the demands of a terrorist, and at least one more person would die, or they could publish it.
Fitz goes through the manifesto with an eye toward finding linguistic forensic clues, anomalies like variant spelling or unique word choices or phrases.
I'll never forget reading paragraph 185 of the manifesto. The evils of, modern technology and society. I forget the exact quote, but that short paragraph, and he numbered each paragraph, by the way, which made it very easy. Not just pages and not just chapters, because they were numbered too, but actually each paragraph was numbered. And just as a reminder, it was 35, the manifesto was 35,000 words, 56 pages, single space, manual typewritten, not even electric typewriter, because if you remember, he was anti-technology, so he would never use a computer or word processor, but not even an electric typewriter. Long story short, I'm reading through this paragraph 185, and yada, 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 but you can't eat your cake and have it too. I think I actually read through that once that day. Then when I always read everything twice, like within the same hour, or what I may have missed the first time. And the second time, wait a minute, you can't eat your cake and have it too. Hold on, let me think now. All my life, when I use that term, that axiom, I say, you can't have your cake and eat it too. He transposed the two verbs. I said, boy, this is kind of interesting. So I ran to the bosses and showed them that. They said, oh, wow, yeah, thanks, Fitz. I'm not sure what that means. I said, neither do I know what it means. But boy, if we get lucky enough and we get a suspect and we get the known writings of that suspect, and it comes back to, and we somehow find that quote with the transposed verbs like his in the manifesto, it's a pretty good clue.
Running a business comes with a lot of what-ifs. But luckily, there's a simple answer to them. Shopify. It's the commerce platform behind millions of businesses, including Thrive Cosmetics and Momofuku. And it'll help you with everything you need. From website design and marketing to boosting sales and expanding operations, Shopify can get the job done and make your dream a reality. Turn those what-ifs into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
Meantime, there was a debate brewing. Should the FBI give its blessing to the media to print the Unabomber's manifesto? Remember, the United States has a policy not to negotiate with terrorists. However, the Unabomber claimed that if his manifesto was published, he wouldn't target any more people with his bombs. Fitz happened to be at those meetings, where they discussed the wisdom of potentially giving in to a terrorist. He would describe the vibe of those debates as being similar to the jury room in that old black and white movie, 12 Angry Men. These jurors were tasked with deciding the fate of a young man who's accused of murder. as they wrestle with their own demons and consciences.
An ignorant slob. He don't even speak good English.
He doesn't even speak good English. Mr. Foreman, I'd like to change my vote to not guilty.
The debate was amongst ourselves, do we publish this thing? Do we recommend it being published or not? And I almost had this thing memorized, the manifesto and the other writings, not literally, but I could pull chapter and verse out the back of my, like the back of my hand. And I'm the first one in that meeting said, he's made us a deal. Let's put it out there. He won't kill anyone. Again, as he says, I'm willing to take him on his word, but there's enough distinctive writing in here that someone is going to recognize it. And it wasn't 12 of us on the task force management team, I think 6 of us, unlike the 12 Angry Men jury scenario, but all 5 of them were against me at first. And no argument or name calling or anything, but just, no, we can't give in to the demands of a terrorist, and every nut job in the country will want their articles published, whatever. And I said, all right, but if we want to solve this case, I think publishing it's the way it goes. And over the next 2 to 3 days, just like the 12 Angry Men jury room, eventually everyone came around and said, all right, let's tell FBI Director Louis Freeh we want it to be, we agree it should be published. He went and told Janet Reno, the then Attorney General, and then they all went and met with the publisher of the New York Times in New York City and said, we, the FBI and the US DOJ, agree it should be published. So it was published in September of 1995 in the Washington Post.
Fitz's position was to greenlight the publication of the manifesto. Doing so would potentially save lives, and ultimately, he believed, the Unabomber's hubris and his peculiar language style would lead to his undoing.
You weren't just saying, let's publish this because I think we should do it. You were using your experience as a profiler that you felt that you could trust. Like, hey, if he says this, I believe he's the type of person that would honor his word based on my profile and what I've gleaned over however long you'd been researching him, right? Talk a little bit about that position, because it's not just your opinion, right?
Well, ultimately it was my opinion, but I would say a learned opinion. And I'm a seasoned investigator at this point. As a police detective, detective sergeant in my early career, my first career, if you will, 7 years in New York City, which is like dog years, 49 years, we kiddingly say in the Bureau, because you're so busy working so many cases. So I was a seasoned investigator, but here I'm a brand new profiler with 12 weeks of training under my belt, some darn good training, but and linguistic stuff, I didn't even probably never use that word once in my life. I certainly knew what it meant, the scientific study of language, but I was just, like I said, I was the mantle was handed to me. John Douglas gave a 2-hour block in training during that 12 weeks, like mini academy at Quantico, but I never realized, nor did he, because he retired then right afterwards. And little did I know that the torch was being passed to me. So then back out and finally in San Francisco, it was, I would say, an educated and experienced guess, projection, summation, if you will, of everything I read about this guy. He wanted to be taken serious. He wanted to be seen as someone who had strong beliefs and philosophies and ideology. And for him then to violate that by the New York Times or whomever printing his manifesto, then killing someone, he would be ripped apart in the media.
The task force was strategic about having the manifesto published in the Washington Post. Investigators strongly believed that the Unabomber lived near San Francisco because of postage placed on packages. They also felt certain that, like other serial killers, the Unabomber wouldn't be able to resist getting a trophy. And for him, that would be his published article.
Because as a profiler, there's serial killers and offenders and serial rapists. Some of them like souvenirs from their crimes, from their victims. Some serial rapists will take underwear. Some serial killers will take locks of hair. They'll take driver's licenses. We thought for sure that this Unabomber would want to see his article, quote unquote, and or manifesto published, and he would want a copy of it. So we thought he would be one of these people that lined up to buy that newspaper.
At the time, there were only 2 places in San Francisco that sold the Washington Post.
And we felt for sure the Unabomber lived within a few hundred miles of San Fran, and he would want to get a copy for himself. So we put surveillance teams on those 2 places. And let me just add, the New York Times was sold in like 24 places in San Francisco. Remember, this is before the internet. I'm not even sure these newspapers had their own websites up yet, 1995.
This surveillance was a massive undertaking.
And there are people lining up around the block because everyone knew in advance, September 19th, manifesto was being published, Washington Post. And there was no online version of it, at least right away, until FBI.gov did it. So people were lined up, of course, in San Francisco, so maybe you can expect some of that. But they're lined up, and the FBI had surveillance teams from all over the West Coast. And we would follow everyone to their ultimate destination that day. No one's rights were violated, anything like that. But if they went into a house, they went into a business, got on the BART, somewhere to travel, they would be followed and eventually interviewed. Hello, sir, FBI. Can we ask you why you bought a copy of this manifesto?
Which ended up being a total bust. However, the idea that someone would identify the author through his writing, not a bust. Linda Patrick was a professor of philosophy, and in 1995, she was in Paris for a work conference. But at her hotel, a headline captured her attention that the Unabomber's manifesto had been published in the Washington Post.
So she went to the lobby of her hotel room, somewhere near the Champs-Élysées, I was told, and sat down at the one computer in the lobby that they used to have back then. And she logged into FBI.gov, because she knew that's where the manifesto was being published, along with the Washington Post, and started reading it and said to herself, holy, you know what? I never met my odd brother-in-law, but this sounds and reads just like this guy, Ted, my husband David's brother, this guy who lives in a cabin by himself in the middle of the woods in Montana.
Linda's husband was David Kaczynski.
So his wife came home. She told him about it. He said, yeah, right, my brother, the Unabomber, he wouldn't hurt a fly.
Linda wasn't convinced. In fact, she felt so strongly about it, she kept at David. She asked him to at least go with her to the library so he could read the manifesto for himself.
It took about a week or 2 before he sat down, and on whatever website at that point, he opened it up, and he said, holy, you know what? And the term that hit him, he didn't pick up on, you can't eat your cake and have it too. That was me. He picked up on a term in the manifesto, 2 words, a noun phrase, and it's just simply the 2 words, actually a hyphenated word, so 2.5, cool-headed logicians. Okay, it's grammatically correct adjective noun. You know what it means, but David claims he never heard anyone use that term except his brother Ted. And there it is in the manifesto.
David recognized Ted's thinking in the Unabomber's words, but also his word choices. Even so, David struggled. He was having a tough time reckoning the brother he knew, who lived an isolated, unconventional lifestyle off the grid in Montana, who he'd never known to be violent, let alone capable of being a serial bomber and serial killer. David's emotions were complex when it came to his brother, who he had always looked up to when he was little. The brothers grew up in a working-class suburb of Chicago, and David was 7 years younger than Ted, who had always been socially awkward to the point where David had been his only friend. Ted was a math prodigy. He went to Harvard when he was just 16 years old and earned a master's degree and doctorate from the University of Michigan by the time he was 24. After that, Ted got a job as an assistant professor of mathematics at the University of California, but after working there for just a few years, he left. And in 1971, Ted and David bought a small piece of land outside of Lincoln, Montana, where together, the brothers built Ted's cabin. But by 1985, Ted stopped talking to his parents. He was punishing them because he'd come to the conclusion that his parents were to blame for his social awkwardness, and that they'd pushed him too hard academically.
He did have daddy issues. He did have problems with his father. His father wound up committing suicide. Ted Kaczynski blamed his parents for making him into a, quote, social retard, end quote. And he really hated them, and he had no remorse when his father died. So does Dad his eye? Is that some kind of a Freudian thing in one way or the other that we can attribute to that? He never talked to us.
Ted excised Dave from his life too. It was after David shared the happy news that he was getting married to Linda. Ted responded by writing a scathing letter saying David was making the biggest mistake of his life. Suddenly, out of thousands of suspects, a man named Ted Kaczynski went to the top of the list. The FBI put eyes on that cabin and began the methodical work of putting together a case. They believed they had time to get a search warrant to get inside the cabin, but their timetable changed when they found out that there was a leak.
Dan Rather on CBS News, one of his reporters found out there was a leak somewhere. Didn't come out of San Francisco. We're convinced it was Washington, D.C., probably the Department of Justice. Some lawyer in there called one of their friends at CBS. And we're planning on making the arrest in like early May. And I think April 1st, and it wasn't an April Fool's joke, Louis Freeh gets a call from Dan Rather. He was the head anchorman on CBS News back then. Hi, Louis. I just want you to know I have information that you guys have a suspect in the Unabomber case living in Lincoln, Montana, and he has a Polish last name. And Director Freeh says, I can't confirm or deny. He said, well, Dan Rather then said, we think we have enough good information that we're going to run with this story tonight. Louis Freeh says, can you give me 3 nights? And they agreed 3. He may have asked for a week, but they agreed on 3 nights. So Louis calls FBI headquarters, FBI, the task force. I'm right there when the call came in, and the big boss took it. And we have to go with this story. You have to make the arrest. There's a leak.
The team surveilling Ted's cabin in Montana was soon joined by a tactical team putting together plans to search the cabin. And Fitz stayed back to help write the search warrant that was based entirely on forensic linguistics.
So we had the 14 Unabomber documents. His mother and brother cooperated with the FBI, and they gave us 178 known writings of their brother, son, Ted Kaczynski, and they're the ones I used. I compared the 178 to the 14 Unabomber documents, and that's where I found these 600 samples or examples that matched up very, very closely in written style, including, I guess I didn't finish the story. His mother kept a letter to the editor that Ted wrote to something like Saturday Evening Magazine. It was published out of New York in the 70s, and Theodore J. Kaczynski signed the bottom of a letter to the editor about the evils of pollution and overpopulation, all those topics. And at the very end, however, you can't eat your cake and have it too. So that's where the comparison finally came in. And that was only a week or so before the search warrant went out. And that was really that silver bullet out of that smoking gun that we really needed linguistically. And the language in that case really was some of the best stuff that we came up with to get in the cabin.
On April 3rd, 1996, a 9-person SWAT team apprehended Ted Kaczynski at his Lincoln, Montana cabin. The 53-year-old was dirty and disheveled. Inside, they found bomb-making supplies, a live bomb under his bed ready for mailing, journals detailing his crimes, and the rough draft of his manifesto.
But we found the actual written yellow legal pad I'm holding up. I'm not sure how many people will be watching this, but the old-fashioned way you'd write a term paper or even a dissertation is you'd write it out by hand first, then you would cross in arrows one page to another, cut it up, cut and paste, literally back in the old days, and we found that document in Kaczynski's cabin. So that was all the evidence we needed to, and bomb parts too, of course, and lots of other evidence and admitted statements that he wrote in his autobiography, in his diary, and he never did talk to any FBI agents.
3 days later, Fitz made it out to the cabin.
There's a little mini robot going into the cabin to look around for tripwires and explosive devices, and we said to ourselves afterwards how upset Kaczynski would have been Mr. Anti-Technology himself, with a modern day, for 1995, robot going through his cabin. So I was allowed to go in 3 days later and just absorbing everything that was inside of it, and just taking it in, because my brain, the whole time I worked this case, and this was a rare time in my career, one of only 2 times that I was solely focused on one case at this time, and to finally be in, and I tried so many times to get inside the mind of the Unabomber in those early days. Now to be inside his cabin was about as close as I was going to get.
Ted Kaczynski was arrested and charged as the Unabomber, and that search warrant based on linguistic analysis would hold up, despite arguments that linguistic analysis failed to meet the burden of proof for that search warrant. Ultimately, Ted Kaczynski pleaded guilty in 1998. He would be spared the death penalty and was sentenced instead to a life without the possibility of parole. After serving 25 years, Ted Kaczynski died in prison in June of 2023. He was 81 years old. His brother, David, had spent a quarter century writing letters to his older brother, asking for his forgiveness for turning him in.
It wouldn't have been right to allow him to hurt anyone else. He had to be stopped in some way, and that was the only way I could think to stop him.
Forgiveness Ted would never give David or their mother.
As brilliant as everyone thinks Kaczynski is, many of his ideas in the manifesto were not original. And I learned before too long in the task force that he copied a lot of his ideas about technology and the evils of it since the Industrial Revolution from a French philosopher named Jacques Ellul, and who had written a book in the 60s, I think late 60s, early 70s. So a lot of what he was a proponent of, was borrowed from this French philosopher. So not a whole lot original to Kaczynski. And of course, his ultimate goal was, really in the first few pages of the manifesto, was his goal to the present evils of technology was to disband it all, and we should live in an agrarian society in tribes of no more than 30 people. So maybe 100,000 years ago, that's how it was working, but it would be a little tough to kind of retrofit our present day society into that, but that's what his answer was, that's what his goal was. And so as brilliant as it was, he really had very little in the area of practical application or solutions for his perceived problems.
So at the end of the day, he was a poser.
That's one term that could be put to him. He wanted to be seen as a real deal, not psychologically unfit, and he argued in the courts not to be seen that way. But he plagiarized some things, he copied others, but I guess because he attached bombs to his ideas, that made him somewhat original. But it really just took away from an argument which possibly holds some water today and back then, but not good enough as far as I'm concerned to kill people.
Before I let you go, I wanted to thank special guest James Fitzgerald. You can hear more of Fitz's profiling insights on his podcast, Cold Red. Up next, criminal mischief bonus content. Here, my co-host Brandon Morgan and I discuss the case in more detail. And as always, thanks for listening. From Pie in the Sky Media, Criminal Mischief is an EVO production, recorded live in the beautiful Pacific Northwest. We're produced by Brandon Morgan and myself. Music by Soundstripe. For EVO Creative, I'm Carolyn Osorio, your writer and host.